I ended up taking it all. Somewhere between 1,200 and 1,600 mics. I was just having this like fuck it moment. So I was in this storage room, lying on the floor with the lights off, and for the first time, I like allowed myself to have the thought, and I said out loud like, "Is being trans real?"
Hello and welcome to The Bridge. My name is Maddie Durbin and I'll be your host. Today I am excited to share an interview with a fellow detransition woman, Mage Fischer. She transitioned as a minor, so she has a little bit of a different perspective to share. Before we get started, I did just want to mention that there are some adult topics in this episode, including sex, drugs, addiction, and childhood sexual abuse. So please use your discretion upon listening to this episode. With that being said, let's get into Mage's story. Hello, everybody, and welcome to The Bridge. My name is Maddie, and I'll be your host across the metaphorical bridge, the things in life that serve to connect us all as people. So here on The Bridge, we share stories from our hearts of love and truth that help bring us closer together to deeper places of understanding. And I have an interest in helping bridge these misunderstandings as somebody who's lived as both a man and a woman. I'm a woman who lived as a trans man for about 6 years of my life, and that story is on my podcast if you want to check it out. And it's been a beautiful journey of coming back to myself as a woman. And as I've been on this journey, I've begun to connect with other individuals who have had similar experiences. So today I'm here with my new friend Mage, uh, who has a similar journey of coming back to herself as a woman after going through the trans experience. So I'm really excited to hear from her and get into some interesting discussions. We connected online through the Detrans Reddit page. Yeah, so welcome, Mage. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me, Maddie. Yes, my name is Mage. I am a writer and artist in recovery and a detrans woman. And I'm currently working on a supernatural novel, and I'm definitely drawing from, um, metaphorically speaking, from some of my life experiences about coming back to yourself and like being true to your nature.
That is super cool. Where are you at in the process with that right now?
So this book has been in the works for a while, and after I got out of rehab, I decided to start from scratch from the beginning of the story and just write. And it feels like it's coming very naturally this time around. So I might use some of what I wrote when I was writing the draft I had been working on a while back, but it definitely gave me a lot of understanding of the world and the characters, and that helps me to just focus on the actual story now. So
That's really cool. Yeah, I see this interview as an opportunity or really just an open floor for you to share your story, whatever you want to share. And also to have some discussion if we want to have some discussion too. So yeah, when it comes to your story, where would you like to start?
um, I think for me it starts in early childhood. Um, I was an undiagnosed autistic child. I don't mean for that to be part of the trope that people talk about or anything, but I did struggle with other children because of that. When I was around 5 years old, I was a very easygoing, confident child. I would strike up conversations with adults randomly and easily, and not be anxious, but I ended up having a hard time with other kids, especially with other girls. Uh, I understand as an adult that these girls were, moving through society, being conditioned socially by, um, the patriarchy and all that. And so, it was probably coming from that place that they would nitpick me about how I was performing femininity and, or wasn't at times. But it was definitely a shocker for me once I started early school and everything because um, I grew up in a very rural area. So most of the people that I would see were people who had known me and knew my family, and my parents very much always had a mentality of letting their kids have agency and decide what we want to do. So um, once I started, running into issues with other kids, having them pick on me for, the way I like to play, the way I like to dress, different things like that, because, I was, I was in some ways into girly things, but in some ways I was more boyish, and I had a bit of a phase around third grade where I just wanted to like look more like a boy and um, have short hair and everything. Even people who I was friends with would sometimes kind of give me a bit of a hard time about that. And another important childhood aspect is that I was molested at age 10 by the older brother of one of my closest friends. So this was a family whose house I slept over at all the time. It was kind of like a second home to me. So it was very impactful to go through something traumatic in that setting. And um, it was not handled well by the adults who were around us at all. It was not treated as like a transgression, and um, I didn't get any help. Their parents didn't make it possible for me to continue my friendship without having to see my abuser. So it was a very confusing situation for me because I was feeling the feelings around that are, your standard reaction to that kind of thing, but nobody was telling me anything that helped me make sense of that, helped me understand this is normal. This is a normal way to feel when you've been violated. So I was very much looking for a reason of why do I feel this way, and why do I feel so sick now and so like disconnected from myself physically. And um, at some point, it did cross my mind that uh, the situation would not be seen as normal if it had been a boy my age who this had happened with, um, and so, I did have a sense that like this happened because I'm female, and um, uh, being female makes me a target for this kind of thing to happen to me. And as well, I this wasn't the first thing on my mind when I first started to look into transitioning and think about gender identity, but along the way, it did occur to me of like, oh, well, if I'm really a guy, then that's why I felt so weird because this, was going against the role that I want to play and my identity. And so that's a way that I can now understand, oh, this is why I feel this way without having to acknowledge that, like, it's the situation and the people around me are not properly addressing the situation. And, like, that's an issue with them that I, have to respond to in some way. So,
I'm curious, did you always remember the event that happened to you, like the assault, or was there any repression of that memory?
um, I would say there was some slight repression. Um, at some point in between when I told my mom what had happened
Mm,
and um, the first year or two of my transition, there was some
mm,
point in between there where I at least put it away at the back of my mind. Um, even if it wasn't a full on like um, amnesia.
Mhm.
Because I definitely had a time around 15 or 16 uh, where it was coming back for me, and I
Mm.
was being confronted with it, and um, remembering it and being, upset and troubled by that, and um, sort of acknowledging on a deeper level for the first time how it affected me.
Mm. Mm.
And I would say that, healing in therapy as an adult definitely was a part of my path to realizing I don't want to keep taking hormones.
Mm.
Um, and that, I didn't feel happy being a man the way that I had imagined that I would.
Mhm. Yeah, so let's go back to so the I guess what happened between age 10 and then when you decided to you wanted to transition, and how did that happen? Like, where did that decision come from?
Yeah, well, so, I would say I'm someone who always knew that I was queer. I had crushes on girls and boys from a young age. I, my brother remembers me saying to him as a very small child, when I fall in love, it's not going to be because they're a boy or a girl. I'll just fall in love with them. Um, so, uh, that was something that felt pretty natural to me. Well, first of all, just in terms of what was happening with me between those years, I definitely had a, a dark time in middle school. Certainly seventh grade. By then, I was very depressed. I didn't have very much hope for the future. I did not feel good about the idea of growing up, being a woman. So I became pretty obsessed with the apocalypse for a while, various different ways that the apocalypse could happen, because that sounded more like something that I could do at the time. I was like, oh, like just watching everything crumble in society just crumble away, and then just like, living out my days, like, and trying to survive. Like, that was something that I was, which I think is also an angsty preteen thing too, but the way that I felt about life definitely added to the appeal for me of that. As I finished middle school and was going to be leaving the school that I was at, from elementary into middle school, I started to think more about my identity and being queer and things like that, because it was like, oh, it's kind of like I get a fresh start and everything. And I went to boarding school for high school. And my freshman year, I actually went to an all girls school. Um, I was in the GSA club there, and I made some friends who I remember we would, talk about what different identities we thought we had. It was like, um, I thought I was bisexual, but people were also talking about like, oh, I was found out what pansexual is, and people were talking about being demisexual, and of course, gender identity came up. I definitely was very invested in the LGBT club at the school, but I also had a friend who we would just hang out and watch YouTube videos of these like um, queer YouTubers who talk about coming out and everything. That was a time. It was around 2015, 2016. So it was 2015. Yeah. Coming out videos were a big thing back then. And that was like a big focus. and like advice for coming out and everything like that. That's where I got introduced to the idea of experimenting with pronouns and choosing your own pronouns, and that's not something that I had ever heard of until that point. And there was one event that we had for Wings was the name of our LGBT group at school, and so Wings had this social event where a GSA group from a different school came to visit us at our school, and we all watched this documentary about kids transitioning. Some of them were pretty young, some of them were more teenage. And so we watched this documentary, and then we broke up into discussion groups, small groups, to discuss the movie, and that was a big moment. It, uh, I think I'd come across Jazz Jennings at one point before that, but I hadn't really applied it to myself because it was an MTF. Uh, and Jazz was presented in this certain way where it almost just made it, the way she was presented on TV made you feel as if like she had just been born like visibly trans somehow.
Yeah,
Like you didn't necessarily look at her back then and think like, oh, anyone can do this.
right.
Um, but that's a very interesting case there for sure.
Absolutely, yeah.
But this documentary, there were definitely things I saw in, like, you're seeing the parents talk about why they're letting and why they're like paying for their kids to do this and supporting it, and maybe how they came around to it, and of course the reasoning behind it, why this is what's right for their kid, and the kid talking about why they feel like they're this gender. And um I definitely was seeing things that I was like, oh, that's a lot like me. That's a lot like me as a kid. And I remember in our discussion group I said, oh, well, I think people should be careful about this because a lot of the things that these kids were saying, these are things that I said when I was younger, but I'm not doing this. And um somebody in the group chimed in and was like, so you identify as a girl now? And I was very taken aback at that. I was like, what does that mean, identify as a girl? Like, it's never been presented as a choice to me. No one ever asked me, do you want to be a girl? Like, it was just my life. And so I remember what the moment they said that, I remember just sort of withdrawing a bit from the group. I felt pulled inside my own head, and I was just like, I I don't know that I would self-identify as a girl. Like, if it is a choice, like, is it a choice? And it started me on this kind of track. And I know it's common for a lot of people to have influence from the internet, and I think after that documentary, I started to look into this. I was like, what is this? What's this about? And the first thing that I saw that appealed to me was a discussion on some online forum where people who were female were talking about identifying, not as being anything, as just being a person. And I was like, ooh, I like that. They were like, we're simply, people who happen to have vaginas. We're not women. We're just people. And I was like, I've never felt like I want to be defined by being a girl. I've always felt like you know, the people who I look up to, it's about what they do, not about their gender. And I don't want to be told that I have to look up to women and not men. And I was, dealing with disconnected feelings about my body. So uh, I saw that and I was like, that definitely resonates. And so I did start going by they them that freshman year. And I was already actually going by a new name. Um, I started going by a new name when I started high school, and that was like before ever coming out as trans. Uh, I think there was a lot of baggage for me associated with my birth name, and it's also it means freedom in Gaelic, and I had always loved my name, but when I started to really struggle mentally, it started to feel very strange to be named Freedom. I was like, I don't feel like the embodiment of freedom right now. I really don't. So, yeah, I'd started going by my middle name, which was more androgynous as well. I didn't have to like do a name switch with my new friends at school or anything, and I just started doing the pronouns. And pronouns, it wasn't the thing that it is now. It was kind of a thing where my friends who were also LGBT, or just sort of hung out with LGBT people, I knew like, oh, I would ask them to call me they, but like I didn't expect the whole school to do it. People who I didn't really hang out with or who were a little more conservative, I didn't expect it. Um, and the YouTube thing started to take a bigger and bigger role in my life. I was staying up at night watching transition timeline after transition timeline on my phone. I was watching these people transform from, you can see they're kind of uncomfortable, kind of awkward. And then over time, like they look confident, they work out, like that they get a girlfriend and like, they're like doing pull-ups on the beach with their friend that's also a trans guy, and they're jumping in the ocean, and you're like, wow, this looks like life's really turning around. And the more I watched those videos, the more I was like, I need this. Like, imagine me transforming. That would be great. And that's when I started to think, because you know I had considered, oh, I think I'm a agender and I want to use they them pronouns and I don't want to have breasts, but um and I thought that all makes sense, but I couldn't um an agender person couldn't take hormones, right? And then I started to see people who were saying, "Oh, I'm agender and I'm going to start hormones." And I was like, "Oh, like I thought that was only for trans men. Like I thought, I would be appropriating something if I wanted to do that." And so I started seeing people on YouTube, saying like, "Oh, like, you can get top surgery and go on tea and be, and they were talking about taking different doses of tea, even though that's not really quite how the effects of hormones really play out. You can't control how many characteristics you're going to get that way. I started to realize, oh, well, I like the way that these people are transforming when they're taking testosterone. And so I was having a struggle for a little while of like, oh, like, well, am I a trans man or am I agender? And um, I also started to feel more and more uncomfortable being at an all girls school. So I applied to a different school. Um, it was also a school that was just more fitting to my interests, but I had chosen this school because it offered me more financial aid, the all girls school. And yeah, I didn't tell my parents I was reapplying to this other school. I remember I had a friend of my mom's help me with the application fee, and I got in and told them like, okay, I want to transfer. But while I was still in that first year, I remember there was one specific night I was laying in my bed, spiraling about what am I, who am I, and I just said to myself, imagine waking up tomorrow morning and just being male. Like you're you, but you're just male suddenly. And I got this very calm feeling. I was just like that, like everything would be fixed. All my problems would be gone. And so I was like, okay, well, there's your answer. Like, you're a trans man. This is you figured it out.
Wow.
And yeah, so then I transferred schools, and um, when I transferred schools, when I started drinking and smoking weed, and it was with the guys. I there were other trans students at the new school that I went to, but uh, unlike in my freshman year, I was not in the LGBT club here. I had an experience on the summer between those years of going to a summer program and being stealth there. This is pre hormones. I was being stealth. I was living in a male dorm, and that was a very intense experience for me. And it exposed me to a different side of the social life of teen boys when it's just them and no one else is there. And we had another trans man that was openly trans who was also in our dorm, and I noticed he wasn't like, people liked him. He was a very sweet person and people liked him, but he wasn't really one of the guys. We would get together in someone's room and have these conversations, and he was never there for that. He was always off in his room. And they would say things about sex and other stuff, you know around me, not knowing that I was um actually female and that I was trans. That, like, they didn't talk that way when we were around girls. They didn't talk that way in front of the other trans student. And after that experience, starting at my new school, I was like, all right, I gotta play this right. Like, I want the authentic teen boy experience. I don't want to be this other. And
Mm.
so I was,
Did you cut your hair, by the way, at that
I
time?
did, yes, I did. I cut my hair while I was still at the all girls school. And it's funny because I remember before I actually cut my hair, I used to always wear it back and put a hat on. And I would always get told, like, you're not allowed to wear a hat. Like, that's against the dress code. And I would get so upset. And then I just cut it. And yeah, it's funny because I did get a short haircut in elementary school at one point, um, which was partly because I hated brushing the tangles out of my hair. Um, but I specifically, the way I want boy short. I want it boy short, mom. And then I had some experiences of people thinking I was a boy and treating me differently in ways that I didn't enjoy. And uh, so then I was like, I have to grow it out. Like, I can't, like, clearly there's something wrong with being a girl and having people think you're a boy. I didn't know that. So, yeah, I grew it out and, like, insisted on keeping it long. And then once I realized, like, oh, I don't want to be a girl, I cut it.
So it was basically the summer before your sophomore year of high school was when you started identifying as a trans man and presenting that way?
Yeah, that's when I came out as a trans man fully. Because before that, it was like, I was trying to get people to understand, like, I'm different, I'm not a girl, but that wasn't really a thing yet. So everyone was just like, we don't know what you mean by that, honey. Like, so then once I took it to trans man, it was a more intense and solid thing where I could be like, I want to be male. I want to
Right.
medically intervene. And they were,
Uh,
oh, okay. You mean like that? Oh,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Um, would you say at the time, would you call it trans man or would you say trans boy? Because like technically you were still a kid. I'm
I
curious how
was
you
still a boy. I would say guy, I think.
guy. Oh yeah.
Trans guy. Yeah.
I think I would say that too,
Um,
actually.
that used to be very popular. I feel like guy specifically
Yeah.
as like the term. Um,
Yeah.
and yeah, the drinking
Mm.
was a part of that whole boys kicking it thing. You know, was I would shoplift alcohol, and me and my friends would go drink in the woods and smoke cigarettes. And it's funny because at the time I was really not comfortable enough with myself to be interested in sex. Um, but I would feel like pressured to like pretend to fit in with them, like because they'd be like, oh come on, like who are you into, and so I'd be like, oh yeah, yeah, like is this girl, like and like there was someone who went by they them but was still very feminine presenting, and so I was like, okay, this person seems safe, like that they're not gonna mind that I'm FTM, and they were definitely very like interested in the fact that I was transitioning and everything. So there was this slight thing between us, but it really wasn't anything. But I would pretend like it was something just to be like, oh yeah, like, um, I'm just like you guys. I'm trying to get laid, yeah. um, but really, what I really wanted was just to be with them and feel like the kinship with them and be like, yeah, these are my boys. We're we're doing our thing. Looking back, like there was one of those guys who, he was one of my best friends, and uh, I was like in love with him for sure, you know. But like, I was like, no, I just want to be like him, like I feel like um there was a relationship there of like things that I was attracted to in a man. I would be like, oh, that's what I want to be. That's what this
Mm.
feeling is.
I'm curious at that point, because before you identified as bisexual, when you were trying to be one of the guys, did you then sort of
Mhm.
try to turn off that part of yourself that was attracted to guys and just pretend like you only liked girls?
Yes.
Okay, so you were not only just being a guy, you
Yes,
were
I did.
being a straight guy.
Yes, that was
Mm.
my thing. Was I was like, um my kind of brand was, oh, I'm a normal guy, unlike, not that I was going after any of the other trans students or anything, like I've never been a bully, but like I saw that like they weren't part of the male culture at the school, and I was like, that's not what I want. I want to be part of it. So they did put me in a girls' dorm at first, so people knew that I was trans. Um, but when I was talking to somebody new and that came up, I would always make a point to be like, oh, I'm not sensitive about it. We're a tiny fraction of the population. I don't expect you to like understand it fully. I'm just trying to be me and do my thing. Uh, and I played that pretty well, so uh, people generally had a view of me of like, oh, he's not like the others, he's really just a normal guy. Like, could you even really imagine him being a girl? Like, that would be weird, like there was some resentment towards me from the other trans students because of that. Like, I did try to come around a couple times to their meetings and stuff, and the vibe was very much, you are not welcome here. Like, we don't know what you're doing to be in with these cis boys, but whatever it is, we don't like it,
Mm.
Um,
Wow. It's, like, super fascinating to me that you fully immersed yourself into teenage boy culture, like, you became one of them. Like, I feel like that's a
Yeah,
very
I did.
fascinating life experience.
It is. It's something that I do appreciate to this day because I'm like, when I'm dealing with men, like things that like a lot of times they would be like, "Oh, women don't understand this." It's like, "Oh, I understand this. I know. I know what it's about because I've been inside the walls, you know?"
Mm, mhm.
Obviously there's plenty of things about the experience of a man that I will never understand, but I have a lot of insight on certain things that I would not normally have.
Right, definitely. Yeah, and same. Um, but yeah, I'm
Yeah.
curious, did you do that throughout high school? The whole time you were in high school, you were doing that?
No. I
Mm,
couldn't keep it up once I started hormones.
mm.
So, um, yeah, I started hormones at 16. Um, I will note that the therapist who wrote the letter for me to get hormones was not whatsoever trained um, in. I worded that weirdly, but she was not at all trained in gender identity. She had no experience with any other trans patients, clients. Yeah, no gender studies, even background, uh, I remember her saying like, "Oh well, my brother's gay, so I kind of know a couple things." Like having a gay brother really doesn't give you any insight on like a female teenager wanting to be a man,
Right, pretty different
um,
things.
I wasn't in talking to anybody who had any insight on dysphoria in a professional like sense. Um, but I just wanted to get on hormones. I didn't care how. And I was like very anxious about it. I was like, the longer I wait to get on hormones, like you know, the worse things are gonna be, you know? Like I almost looked at it as if I was like being ruined by my natural puberty, which is very sad to me now. Anybody who's transitioned female to male knows once you start testosterone, your relationship to sex changes. You get that increased sex drive from the hormones, and by that point, I had been transferred to a boys' dorm as well. So, um, pretending I was a straight man or boy, that didn't last. I developed a close friendship with a boy across the hall from me. It's funny because when they moved me, they did put me with a gay roommate. He was like he had been head of the gay student group at the school for a while, and like I think they put me there because they were like, oh well, he's not gonna want to fuck this female born person, so this is the least risky room that we can put this student in, is just with this gay student, openly gay student. um which I think is funny because it shows that they were obviously conscious of the fact that like we're taking a bit of a risk here putting a female student into a male dorm, like because usually they required physical transition as well, like for that they let me move before I started T, because like other students made a stink about it and were like showing up at the dean's office being like, why is he in a girl's dorm, this is unacceptable, you need to put him in a boys dorm, like um just because they were like, he's obviously a boy. Like, so I'm on T. I'm in this dorm. It's like a very small dorm. It's just like a couple of rooms that are above the dining hall. We definitely had more freedom than a lot of the other dorms did. We were getting high, and um, I got very close with this guy, and then I ended up like losing my virginity to him in the dorm. I was worried that my friends were gonna look at me differently, but they were just like, ah, dude, like, we don't care who you're into, like you're a boy, like it's okay, like we don't care, you know.
Did that first sexual experience change your perception of yourself at all? Like, in your identity?
Um, it was definitely some kind of shift, just in the sense that like before then I did think I was interested in that kind of sex. I had discovered porn around age 12, and uh I was watching like weird stuff, like not normal stuff, you know. I won't go into any detail on that, but like I didn't think I was interested in just like your standard kind of sex. And then, I developed these feelings for this guy, and realized like, oh, I want to do this with him, like, and that was a bit of like a thing for me. I was like, I want that, like that. I thought I wasn't gonna want that, but I didn't go, oh, I'm maybe I should rethink this transition. Like, I didn't think that at all. Because I was like, oh well, if this only happened now that I started hormones, clearly like I'm becoming who I'm supposed to be, and now I want to have sex because of that. And he also was very validating to me. He was someone who he made a point to validate me in being a guy a lot. So I felt like I was like, oh, this doesn't make me a girl, because he doesn't see me that way at all. Like, he sees me for who I am, like we're having a gay experience.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Another question, uh, where was your boarding school? And also, did you ever see your parents at this time in your life? And how did that impact the getting on hormones situation?
So, I had already made it clear that that was something I felt strongly about before I went to the school that I was at for most of my time in high school. That school was in Vermont. So I grew up in Connecticut. The first school I went to was in Connecticut, but it was far enough from our house that I was boarding there. But I could see my family pretty often. My mom would pick me up every week to take me to my guitar lesson. Um, and she was the one who I spoke with the most about this stuff. And she went to some groups of like other parents of trans kids, and was influenced by them to feel like, oh, like, if you want your child to be safe, like, you need to support this. So she really took it upon herself to push things forward. So she helped me with, I before I got on hormones, I legally changed my name. I legally changed my gender marker, I think. Or no, not the gender marker, that came later, but the name I changed. So she helped me with that whole process. She helped me get on hormones. My dad definitely um, had his questions about like, how does this work? Are there any like medical concerns? That kind of thing. He's a very science minded person, but my mom definitely impressed on him like this is life or death. This is, we need to support this. And I'm not blaming my mom at all. Like I said, she was trying to do her research, and where she was looking, she was being told, like, if you care, you'll support it. And I just know that I was not communicating well with my dad at that time. When he would try to have a conversation with me, I was very defensive, even when he wasn't being, you know, um, unsupportive or against it. He was just saying, I don't really understand where this came from, and like what the implications are here, and all that. But he did end up being very supportive of it over time, but I do remember being asked questions by him and being like, not being open to being questioned at all. Um,
Yeah.
so uh, the school I transferred to was in Vermont, so I didn't see my family as so often. You know, I'd see them like Christmas, Thanksgiving, spring break. Um, and when they would come to get me to take me to get my blood work done for the endocrinologist for my HRT.
Did you also have to be on puberty blockers at that age?
No, because by 16, like the ball's already rolling on my natural puberty, so there'd be no point of giving me blockers. I thought I was gonna have to do blockers to like suppress the estrogen first or something, but when I went to the doctor, they were just like, "Oh no, nah, not at 16."
Hmm, interesting. I still don't really even know how
Yeah,
that whole thing works, and I haven't actually talked one-on-one to many people that transitioned as minors, so this is interesting for me to hear your experience.
yeah, yeah. I mean, it's wild that as a minor, a letter from just like a general therapist who doesn't specialize was able to be enough. That is wild to me. A lot changed when I did open up to being bisexual. I feel like my attitude just shifted. I feel like I became less wrapped up in the whole like uber masculinity thing. And you know, like I became more open to like being like, oh well, I'm a guy, but I could be any kind of guy I want to be, and I could be a guy that has an earring and wears pink sometimes and stuff like that. You know, like because I'm a queer guy. You know, um, so I think my life became more chill at that point because of that, because I wasn't being so hard on myself to fit into such a specific box. Because before that, I was really like, I was so like, took me so long to just get myself dressed each day because I can't really even tell you what the specific look I was going for was, but I had to feel a very certain way about how like my whole outfit looked on me, and like I cared about which side of the hoodie my zipper was on, and because it's like buttons and zippers are on different sides in men and women's
Oh,
clothing.
yeah, yeah.
Like I cared about that. Like what a stupid
Oh.
thing to care about, you know?
Mm,
Um and um I was binding for way too long. Like I started to get more comfortable not having a binder on or not having a shirt on once I started to like explore sexually with another person, you know.
mm,
Having someone be sexually attracted to me made me start to feel a bit different about my body, you know, maybe start to appreciate certain things about my body. You know, like I still had what I understood as dysphoria um around, especially around having a vagina, but like there were other features that I was like, oh well, this is actually, I'm cute. Like this is like not a bad thing, you know. Like it was also such a complicated relationship, like because we were good friends, then we hooked up, then like he. I don't feel guilty about this now, but I do look back and feel a little bit like, like maybe he didn't have to go through all this because he had a whole identity crisis around his sexuality because of being involved with me. And
mm.
sitting here now as just like a bisexual woman, I'm like, oh damn, I made this teenage boy go through like a whole thing.
Maybe he'll find this
When
interview
he's
and it'll give him some peace.
I like was in love, you know, and um, he was like he had like it took him a long time to like be okay with the relationship we were having, you know.
Mm,
So like after our first time, like he told me like I was just experimenting and it's never gonna happen again. And then he kept coming back. And so it was this like roller coaster for me where I would be like super happy when like something happened with us, and then I would be completely distraught when um like he was just like isolating and ignoring me. And so I felt the need to say that because it's not like it was like, oh, but being a teenager having sex for the first time, I mean, it was just great. It just really only improved my self-esteem. That's, it's got two sides, of course.
Absolutely. Yeah. Being a
um
teenager is already pretty hard.
yeah. Also, as I progressed through high school, I became more and more of a huge stoner. I was smoking a lot of weed, and I was doing acid
Oh.
um,
Mm.
a lot. There was like a hippie culture at my school, so yeah, there was definitely a whole crowd there where like smoking weed and doing acid was like very normalized. I'm in recovery now, and I can look back and be like, yeah, as in high school, I was using substances in an unhealthy way.
Mhm. Yeah, and you told
Um,
me about a particular acid trip that seemed like it kind of represented like
mhm.
maybe a rock bottom moment. I'm curious, when did that happen?
Yeah, that was after high school.
Mhm.
So that was between high school and college. I took a few years off and just worked. And that's when that happened. So I could talk about that. Before that happened, I uh, got top surgery spring
Mm.
break of my senior year of high school. Um, I did enjoy my results, but the recovery was a very depressing time for me.
Mhm.
But I did definitely really enjoy the results for a long time. And even now, I don't hate my chest or anything. I have a plan to get a chest tattoo, and I think that's gonna and it's gonna have the Venus symbol on it. So I feel like that's gonna help me feel more like I'm reclaiming that area after altering it. So then I graduated and moved to Massachusetts. The plan was just to take 1 year off and work and do some different stuff and then go to college. I had already gotten into my college. Um, but uh, then the pandemic hit,
Mm.
and um, I already didn't have much of a social life because um, I had moved to a new place and everything. And um, after you get out of high school, socializing can be kind of hard because you're used to just having school with people and making friends there, and now you don't have that anymore. And I was autistic, and I was gonna find that out soon, but I still hadn't been diagnosed yet. So, um, things I started to struggle. Like, there was a couple things I had going on. Like there was a girl who I was involved with for a little bit. That was definitely something that I got this sort of boost in my sense of self and identity from being with her and having her look at me as like the guy and everything. But then she went back to school, and that was kind of that. I had started to go on Grinder at this point. That started late high school. I started going on Grinder. Grinder's really crazy. Grinder's a
Yeah,
crazy. There's nothing like it.
right, which for those listening who do not know, Grindr is a gay man hookup app, typically, anyways.
Yes, it is. And
Mhm.
yeah, the typical Grinder experience is log on and have your inbox flooded with dick pics immediately. So I was having grinder hookups, and often like that was my way of just like if I was feeling like I'm kind of bored and lonely and want to just kind of hang out, like oh I know I'll get instant attention if I go on grinder. So and that's really not ideal, like because the kind of attention you're gonna get on grinder isn't really probably the best thing if you really just need someone to talk to. Uh, I will say I think I had a somewhat addictive relationship with that app. And I would something would happen where I would get fed up and I would delete it, and then maybe a couple months later I would get back on and I'd be like, "Hey, we're back, we're outside, 100 feet away. There's a man, and he wants you now."
Oh my god. I'm laughing because
Um,
I can
you would
relate.
think that, yeah, you'd think that people who don't know would think that people like us wouldn't have gotten far on Grinder. Oh no, there are plenty of people on there that are like they're on there scrolling, they're looking for whatever they're looking for. They're probably open to a whole bunch of different things, and then they're like, "Wait a minute, so you have a pussy? I didn't think I was getting pussy today. Like, all right, like, what do I gotta do to get you to come over? Like, and I'm like, well, if you get me high, I'm there, and that was a big thing with me. Yeah, my life was really just working and then getting high, and then with the pandemic, it got even worse. Like for a while, I couldn't go to work, and I was just sitting at home getting stimulus and buying drugs, and so I met this guy who was a dealer, and I met him on Grinder, and I asked if he could get me some acid, and he got some, and he was like, "You should buy it now because like they're I don't know if they're cracking down or something, but there's like it's hard to get it right now." And so I was like, okay, like how much do you have? And I bought 10 tabs from him. And the plan was just this is going to be my little stock, so that like, when the chance comes up to go visit one of my good friends from when we were in high school, or maybe like my brother, or my something like that, like I'll be like, hey, I got some acid, like let's go. But I ended up taking it all. Somewhere between 1,200 and 1,600 mics, which a standard dose would be like 1 to 300 mics probably. So yeah, I was just having this like fuck it moment where um, I was like, I want to do one of those drastic things that people do when when life feels like shit and they're fed up. And I was like, I'll just take all the drugs that I have. I can say that that was an overdose, even though you can't die from acid. I count that as an overdose because I was experiencing loss of motor function and psychosis, and I was hospitalized and put on suicide watch for 5 days. During that experience, I was down in the basement of my apartment building. I lived in an apartment with my dad, just the two of us, and there was a storage unit for our apartment that I used as a studio, and I would just get high in there and stuff too. And so I was in this storage room, lying on the floor with the lights off, and I was like hearing all these voices and stuff, like, and for the first time, I like allowed myself to have the thought, and I said out loud, like, "Is being trans real?" And that was like a crazy moment for me because like myself being trans, as well as in general like arguing for transness as a like immutable natural characteristic, it was a big part of my beliefs at the time. So this was a huge shift. that really set me spiraling because it's like, I was just having this moment of like, what is my entire life? What the fuck am I doing? Like, where is this going? Um, and so eventually I was like, I've got to get out of this storage room. And so like I like left the storage room and came up out of the basement and was trying to go back up to the apartment. And as I was walking, I just get my legs would like buckle underneath me and I would just fall to the ground. And every time I fell, my visuals looked like, the best way I can describe it is if you can think of a camera like being in the ocean and like going under the water, like if it's floating and it like goes under and then back above the surface, and that it was like I was seeing that where every time I fell, it was like I was falling under, but the under the ocean was just blackness, and in the blackness there were all these floating white orbs all around me, and they were like, I could tell that they were like beings or souls or something, and they were like calling out to me and saying like, we are all one, we are the everything, like you can come join us. And whatever that was, looking at that now, I would see that as maybe having a meaning of like accepting the creator or higher power, accepting, that that this world and this universe is all one existence, and that, like all kinds of things like that. At the time, I heard that and I was like, so I should kill myself. Like, that's how I joined the everything, is right, that's by dying. That was just my only like thought. I did make it up to the apartment, but I was, yeah, completely losing control of my body, and my dad found me and called 911, and these scary bald men with black boots showed up and strapped me down to a stretcher, and I was like, this is not what I had in mind when I told you that you could call for help at all. So I was like resisting. I was like, I'm not going with these guys. And they were like, yes you are. And I'm pretty sure they gave me a sedative in the ambulance because um everything went black, and like I woke up like in the hospital, and like it was before I was like put in the room that I was put in, so it was like there's like a bunch of people around me, and there was like some needles in my arms and stuff, and I think they were probably trying to figure out what was going on with me or something. um, and so I woke up and I immediately started thrashing again, and I remember hearing someone say, I'm getting really tired of this shit, and then I like passed out again, and then I woke up in the ER, and I was still seeing like geometry and stuff from the acid when I woke up, and I was probably still tripping for like a full day because that was a lot of acid. My brother has a lot of experiences with substances, and after I got out of the hospital from this experience and I was telling him about it, he was like, Jesus, that's a lot of acid. I'm surprised you're sitting here talking to me right now. Like, you should be a vegetable. I guess the creator had plans for me still. Um, and even though this experience included me questioning my transition, I didn't stop yet. When this happened, I was already scheduled to have a hysterectomy. I was 19 at this point. And you would think that being on suicide watch for 5 days would like call to question, whether a hysterectomy that's for the purpose of like a mental thing of like transitioning. You would think that that would be paused, but it wasn't. They were like, "Oh, we're not going to hold that against you. That would be messed up. Like, um, you're just having a hard time. Like maybe this is a sign of like how badly you need this. Um, I think it's I don't have any ill will towards the surgeon who did my hysterectomy because, as a surgeon, I think it's likely that she doesn't really know the specifics of whatever mental health process I'm going through. Like, I could see a surgeon just assuming that, like, the people responsible for meeting with me are going through all the possibilities. But I still do feel like when you have someone as young as 19, you know, sterilizing themselves, like, I mean, like, I could still have a kid using a surrogate, but, like, it's still a very serious procedure, and something like 5 days on suicide watch, I think, should call into question my decision making capabilities.
So how did you feel after the hysterectomy? And also, um, how did, the hospitalization and suicide watch, how did that impact? Was that Did that have anything to do with what sparked your sobriety journey, or was that later?
It was kind of my first stint into sobriety, I guess. Um, because when I was released from the hospital, they did put me into a PHP program, so that's partial hospitalization. That was specifically for LGBT adults struggling with substance abuse and mental health. And so I was introduced to DBT for the first time. It was all on Zoom because of COVID, but I was talking with other LGBT adults who were struggling, and um, I definitely did enjoy having that support. And it did stick for a bit. It did stick for a bit in terms of being sober. I got sober for a while. Um, the hysterectomy, I felt good about it afterwards. This was a much better recovery process for me because I learned from my top surgery experience that I needed the right person with me. So this time I had my sister come stay with me and take care of me. And she was just a lot better person for me to be around. Or just to be taking care of me. I love my dad and my brother, but they just weren't really cut out for it. I think part of the way I felt about the hysterectomy was just because of how I felt about surgery in general. I think that's also part of the reason that I got it. Was maybe you'll relate to this. There's an addictive thing with surgery, you know, of like having the experience of having them put you under anesthesia and you wake up physically altered, and you have this idea that it's like, oh, they're gonna make this physical altercation to me and it's gonna fix me in some way. It's gonna fix something about me, you know? And so it was like I almost felt like I was due for another round of that. And the next logical one was a hysterectomy. I told my mother about that when I visited her this past weekend, and she was like, "Oh wow, I hadn't even thought of that." Because my mother's in recovery too, so she knows a lot about addiction. She runs Dharma Recovery Group, and she was like, "Wow, like that makes so much sense." At first, I was really glad to have a hysterectomy. It was a big relief to me to know that I wouldn't have to worry about getting pregnant, because at that age, I was really not the best with sexual safety. I was very easily pressured to have unprotected sex. I'm a people pleaser, and I've gotten to a much healthier place with that now, where it's like, yes, I do want to help people and do things for people, but I know that I have to um, take care of myself and create and enforce my boundaries. But I no good at that at all when I was a bit younger.
So, uh, can we go to the moment, if there was a moment when you had the realization that or I guess maybe the moment of acceptance that the trans identity was no longer serving? you?
Mhm. Yeah, I think knowing it was, a gradual thing from the point of that trip on where I even, well, actually, this had to do with the hysterectomy as well, because I realized I wanted to get off tea. And I started to find videos online of people talking about getting off of tea. Um, they weren't talking about the whole detrans thing. They were just talking about like not taking tea anymore. Um, and so I started to look into things and I was like, well, I don't want to start having periods. But I saw, oh, well, I could get a hysterectomy. And as long as I keep my ovaries, like, I don't have to take any hormones. So I could just, if I get the hysterectomy, then I can stop tea. I won't have periods. And so that was actually a factor in why I got it at the time. So I didn't tell anybody this, but this was part of my plan was I get it. And then after that, I will stop tea.
Why
And
did you wanna
so,
stop tea?
I was starting to feel uncomfortable with the degree of physical masculinization. So, like the amount of facial hair, body hair that I was having, I was starting to, like the way my body shape was changing was starting to get to an extreme for me that felt like too much. And it was also like, there had been this positive feeling from being on hormones that I had the first couple years that just plateaued completely, and I wasn't getting that like euphoric feeling anymore from taking them. And I also just didn't like relying on a medication for something that felt so basic, like such a base level part of life as your hormones. Um, those were all contributing factors. I was getting to the point where I was like, okay, like my end goal in life is not even to be a man. I wasn't quite to the point of being like, oh, I'm a woman and that's okay. But I was like, what if I could be this third thing? Like a physically third thing that's neither male or female. And then I definitely got into some different online communities. Um, just people who are generally out there in their outlook on like identity and life. Like it wasn't your standard trans community. It was more out there. People who are kind of philosophizing and trying to come up with their own idea of things. I was including, when I'm in these online spaces, I was including like a bunch of different pronouns. I eventually came around to like, oh, well, what if I put she in there too? What if it's like he, she, they, or like these neo pronouns, And so that was where I started to really like bring the woman identity back in, was like, oh, well, I'm going to use she, but not in a cis way, in this like other way where I'm like, I'm open to all these different things. Because it was hard to accept like the idea that like, oh, I'm cisgender. Like after living this life that I've been living, like, how can I be that? Like, cause like there's a connotation with cisgender where it's like, oh, you're just kind of factory settings. You know what I mean? Like you have the automatic, if you're playing a game, you have the automatic settings that the game puts you on. You haven't customized your character. And I was like, I've definitely been customizing for a while now. Like, so that was a hard thing to accept. But so I was kind of in that in between place. Eventually, like in real life, obviously, all that stuff is kind of too much for anybody. So, when I did get to college, I was just sort of saying any pronouns because people at college, at least at the kind of college I went to, and I think at a lot of colleges, people ask about your pronouns all the time. Every class you're in will ask about your pronouns. For a while, I decided any pronouns was my answer so that I didn't have to deal with correcting people. I didn't have to be upset based on what someone called me because I don't care. I don't care what you call me. You can call me whatever you want. I would say a turning point in that, um, because I at that point I had started to become more aware of the phenomenon of detransitioners and the fact that I fell somewhere like I at least I had things in common with these experiences. I was making progress in my my relationship with my trauma and feeling very differently about my body. After I had the hysterectomy, I started to realize like I don't want to do whatever experimental surgery I was researching. Like I actually don't have a problem with having a vagina, and like this is actually not there's nothing this is a beautiful thing, there's nothing wrong with this. That wasn't something I had expected to happen when I started transitioning, and so I knew that you know I was kind of detransitioning, but I it was hard to let go of the community. um I think that's a common experience for detransitioners, is like, but this is my social community. Because I had gotten very involved in the online trans community um, after leaving high school. A turning point was that I got into a relationship where, for the first time, I had the feeling of like, I wish I could carry this man's child. And I
Mm-hmm.
was like, are you serious? Like, I thought I was 100% sure that my whole life I would never want that. Like, I was disgusted at the idea of being pregnant. Um, I was I was 5 or 6 years old when I announced to my family, I'm never going to give birth. I'm gonna adopt. Like, and this was something my parents pointed to when they took me to the doctors as like a sign of like, see, this is why we are letting our kid do this. Why we know that our kid is trans.
Mm-hmm.
And now suddenly here I am. I've had this hysterectomy, and I'm like getting emotional about the fact that I wouldn't be able to ever like make a child and carry it. That's half me and half a man that I love. And so at that point, I was like, all right, I'm a woman. I'm fully a woman. Like,
Mm,
that was like the final thing that was like, this was one of the biggest reasons why I ever didn't want to be a woman, was pregnancy. And now
mm,
I'm realizing like I shouldn't have closed that door so young. Like,
mm,
and I was fucked up over that for a couple years. Like, I would cry about it from time to time, and I made a playlist for it. Mourning the Babies I'll Ever Had, it's the title, and had all these different songs that would help me be in my feelings about it. I
mhm,
laugh about it now just because that's what I do when once I have processed things. I'm like, life, isn't it wild?
mhm. I think it's very beautiful the way that you, like, allowed yourself to mourn that part of yourself, and actually feel your emotions around that. Um, yeah, I think it's just so interesting how, like, each of us who's gone through this detransition experience, like, we all have different parts that we have to sort of mourn. Like, I just talked to a friend the other day, and, like, the one thing that she sort of had to mourn was, like, her voice. And then, like, for me, it's
Hmm.
definitely been the double mastectomy has been the hardest part for me. Um, and then,
Yeah.
like, I have so much empathy and just feel so much for the people that did get any kind of bottom surgery, because that's a lot to have
Yeah.
to grieve. Yeah.
Can only imagine. Like, I'm also really glad that I was always someone who would do my own research and knew before I even had a consultation for the histo, I'm keeping my ovaries. I
Mhm.
don't want to be medically dependent on synthetic hormones, because, um, some people didn't really think about that or understand that, didn't go to a surgeon who cautioned them about that, and then, um, end up having to take hormones even when they like stop doing HRT. And obviously, there's nothing wrong with that. Hopefully, they have the health care they need, but it's I'm glad it's something I was able to avoid
Mm-hmm.
needing to get for myself all the time. And I think it also, it was a really nice process to see my natural estrogen production kick back in, and eventually I went to the gynecologist and asked them to do blood work for me to see where my hormone levels were at, and they said, "Oh, you're at normal estrogen levels for a woman your age," and that was a really nice experience for me to see, like, oh, my body knows how to be a woman. Like,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
that's how it's wired, and it knows how to do that even after I did all this stuff that I felt like was irreversible.
Mm-hmm.
It's funny when I meet people now and I tell them, like, oh yeah, I was a trans guy for 5 years. They're like, really? And I'm like, sometimes I'll, depending on who it is, I'll show them a picture of
Mm-hmm.
myself at the peak of my transition, and they're like, that's a different person. Like,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do
um,
that too sometimes. I mean,
yeah,
it's pretty incredible the ways that we can like transform, you know. I'm curious
for sure.
what is your perspective on this experience that you went through now, and maybe also describe a little bit about where you are in your life now?
Yeah. So right now I am a little over 4 months sober. I had struggles with substance abuse that I didn't get into in this because they're not really part of my detransition. So I Christmas Eve of last year I went to rehab, and of 2024 I went to rehab, and after getting out of there, I've gotten very involved in recovery community, which has been really great for me. I think finding that community has given me a lot of answers around the feelings of being lost and feeling like I didn't belong, that were part of why I transitioned. Because when you go to an AA meeting, there's a common thread whenever someone's sharing their story of, they had certain feelings um, from an early age, like something was wrong with them. And that led them to substance abuse. And so um, it's given me a community in a really great way. And um, I I live in a women's sober house. It's really nice to just be in community with women in a different way. And I'm working on my writing and my art, and um, working a regular customer service type job. I feel like I've come so far in my relationship with myself. I truly love myself now. I really do feel like life gets better as you go on. Um, I feel a lot better about life than I did in middle school or in high school, or even in the times that I saw as the happiest times of my transition. I have a relationship with a higher power of my understanding now, which is something I didn't have during my transition. Um, and that's something that really helps me and guides me. And um, in terms of the transition, like I said, there are things about it that I appreciate. I appreciate the perspective and understanding it gives me on people and on different experiences that men and women have. Um, but at the same time, there are so many pieces of it where I look back and I go, oh, well, now I know what this kid needed, and this is not what they needed. And so my wish for any young people, anybody, but especially young people who are struggling, is like, for them to get the proper support to work through what they're struggling with, and to understand themselves, and to understand that they have time. They have so much time. They have so much life ahead of them. There's so much that they don't know about what their life is going to be. And they don't need to rush into figuring out who they are and what they want.
That's really beautiful. I was going to ask you like what your message is for the people, but you kind of just answered that. Um, but
Yeah.
I mean, is there any, because like, you know, the idea behind the bridge is bringing people closer together. Is there anything else that you'd like to share, like a message? Um, yeah.
With the risk of like sounding like a bit of a hippie, um, I want people to know you are love. Um, I believe that um, whatever you want to call it, God, the creator, a higher power, is the energy that runs through all living things in existence and also is love itself. And you are a direct creation of that love. And that means you can't be a mistake. I also believe, if you are questioning a transition you're currently going through, wondering if you should detransition, somebody professional in my recovery journey always says, um, anything that is meant for you, you won't miss out on. Um, so, even if in the moment it may seem like you've lost something or ruined something or lost a chance to do something, if that is truly meant for you, it's going to come back around in some form. And I do think that that's true. And so don't lose hope, if you don't know where to go, just take things one day at a time and know that, like, it's okay. Hey, y'all, it's Maddie. So we had some technical issues at the end of our interview, so I didn't get to properly close out the interview with Mage, but I do already know I'd love to have her back on the show. So if you guys have any questions for her, curiosities, please put them in the comments. But for now, here's a little goodbye that I recorded on my phone. I just want to say thank you, Mage, for coming on the podcast and sharing your story so vulnerably. You're really a beautiful soul, and I'm really grateful to have connected with you. And maybe too in the future you can come back on and share where your life is at in a year, a couple years, whatever. So thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me. It's been really great talking with you. I really enjoy sharing stories. I think it's important, so I love what you're doing. Oh, thank you. Thank you for joining us. We will see